Hi. So last time we left off talking about identity and how identity is variously constructed through these different concepts of race, ethnicity, gender, and also more recently, nationalism. And so today we're going to start a new topic. And that topic is, how do we understand the world? And is it true? And how do we know if it's true? What is magic, witchcraft, religion, and science? Before we get into that, I want to talk for just a moment about the second exam that we have coming up. So exam two is that exactly in about a week. It's April 16th, next Thursday. It will be available by 5 o'clock that Thursday, and then you will have until the following Sunday, April 19th, to take the exam and submit it. You only have one sitting to take it in. You have one attempt, but you have a 3-day, 3.5-day period in which to take it at a time that works for you after you've prepared. It could be about the same format as our in-class exam, 35 to 40 multiple choice questions worth 70% of your score, and then one essay question, which I'll pull verbatim from the study guide, worth 30% of your score. And so I recommend you go about studying and preparing for exam two in the same way you really would have if we were taking it in class. By definition, I can't monitor whether you look at your notes or books, and so it's technically open book, open note. However, it's a timed exam, so you're not going to have time to sort of search through the material, lectures, readings to try to find answers to the question. Plus, sometimes there's words or information on the slide, but that might not be the answer, but right, you see the words, say, oh, maybe it's that. So it's not a good way to go about it. You want to study and prepare in advance for the multiple choice and the essay portion. The study guide's up, so I believe there's 5 prompts. Prepare for them. Prepare those responses in advance. Go through the material and come up with a solid, specific answer and illustrate your answer with details and examples to show what you're talking about. With that said, if you want to go ahead and prepare your essays ahead of time, and I strongly recommend you do, feel free to use those prepared essay responses while you're taking the exam. You can type your answer right into the window on the computer when you take the exam. So take advantage of that. I really urge you to get those ready ahead of time, and then you've got the essay portion nailed. Even though only one question will be on the exam, essay-wise, studying for all of them is going to help you with the multiple choice section as well. Because we're taking the exam from our homes and you do have access to book, notes, and the internet, be absolutely certain that when you write your essay, you use your own words. Otherwise, it'll be considered plagiarism. So sort of the rule of thumb is 3 or more words in a row that are not your own, taken from the way someone else has said it. That's considered plagiarism. So you need to change it into your own words. It's not really a problem when we take the exam in class because you're writing it from your head. So if it comes out kind of the same as I said it in lecture or the reading, doesn't matter. But since you're at home, you need to be really, really careful about this. If you have any questions, just get in touch with me. It shouldn't be much of an issue. I just wanted to point it out to you. So with that, a couple of tips. Again, prepare your answers in advance. With the essays, you don't want to just string together a list of loosely related facts. Illustrate it concisely and appropriately. The concepts you bring in to address the essay question, explain what they mean, and then illustrate what they're all about with examples and details. Make sure you're connecting the examples back to the concept you're illustrating. Provide support for the points that you're making. And then review. Go through the material as many times as you need to until it starts to stick, right? Lectures, readings, and films are fair game. The more you go through it, the more it'll start to stick. So with that said, we can talk about exam 2 a little more next week. And again, the exam is about a week from today. So how do we understand the world, and is it true? And today we'll look at magic, witchcraft, religion, and science. Before jumping in, you should keep in mind for the discussion today that everyone is absolutely entitled to their own beliefs, and I in no way mean to question or disrespect that. However, this is an anthropology class, and thus, as with all topics, we'll be examining religion, or what anthropologists might call beliefs and practices in the supernatural, from a cross-cultural comparative perspective. And so we're not concerned, we're going to be looking at lots of different examples cross-culturally. We're not concerned with right or wrong or truth, superiority or inferiority, better or worse. We're not concerned with any of that in terms of the different belief systems. We're cultural relativists, meaning one sort of system, one society, their beliefs and practices are not inherently superior or inferior to another. They're different for different reasons, cultural relativism. And so we are concerned in our discussion with religion and witchcraft and magic, or what you probably refer to as religion. Anthropologists would also include magic and witchcraft with religion. And so we would refer to all three as beliefs and practices in the supernatural. And so we are concerned with the how is it done? What does it look like? And also the why. Why do people practice these different beliefs and customs? Why do they do it? What do they do it for? Religion, here to referred to as religion, which again includes witchcraft and magic. It's these various beliefs and practices in the supernatural. That's just a really big word full of mouths, or mouthful of words. So religion from here on out. All cultures have some form of what we call religion. It's one of those interesting universals. Not necessarily all people follow a religion, but all societies have some type of what we call religion. It's part of worldview, how people perceive and interpret the world around them, interpret their reality, which again in turn patterns their behavior. And so much of what the other does to us seems weird or exotic or strange or even completely irrational. And hopefully today you'll come to see that the other groups of people, whether they're practicing witchcraft or magic or some type of religion, they're not really doing anything so different from what many of us also do. Many of you also practice magic. You just don't perceive it as such, and you don't label it as such. Magic is what other people do, right? Not us. Hopefully we can take a closer look at that today. And so because every society has what we call a form of what we call religion, it sort of begs the question. It's one of those rare universals. We see it across the entire species. So is there something sort of significant or adaptive about religion for people that helps them live their lives? Because again, we see it in every society. It begs the question, is there a reason for that? Is there an explanation for that? Is it somehow adaptive or serve some other purpose for people? So Peoples and Bailey give three sort of explanations for the existence of religion, why people have it, why it exists universally. What's it do for people? And the three explanations are psychological, social, and also what they call the cognitive and intellectual. So I want to speak just for a minute about each. It's interesting. You should read it in the book and also maybe take some notes right now because you won't find this in the lecture elsewhere. So I'm just taking a sip of my coffee with bourbon in it. Just kidding. First, the psychological explanation. These folks would say religion, practices, beliefs in the supernatural exist because the world is a stressful place, psychologically, right? There's a lot of things to worry about. People die, relatives, loved ones get sick, pass away. Our relationships might not go the way we want. Accidents happen, we get hurt. And so the psychological explanation says this is sort of why religion exists. It fulfills a psychological function for people. It's a coping mechanism. It allows them to deal with stressful events in their lives. So just for example, and your book gives numerous, the notion that heaven exists in Christianity. So it's a way, so even though you're going to die, it's okay. You're going to go to this great place that's actually even better than life on earth. So it's sort of, again, a coping mechanism, as you will. It provides psychological relief for things that are stressful or things that are scary, quite frankly. The critique of the psychological explanation is that while it may help people cope, it might help with mental health, it can also do the exact opposite. So for example, you might go to heaven, you might also go to hell, right? And be eternally damned and tortured. What sort of anxieties is that relieving for people? And Peoples and Bailey give another example of this group. I don't remember quite where they were from. I'd reference you to the text. And their afterlife, no matter if you're good or bad or a piece of shit on Earth, their afterlife sucks for everybody. It's sort of a scary land of the dead type place, no matter who you are, no matter how well you lived your life. So again, whose anxieties are being relieved by that belief system, right? That's the critique of the psychological. They all have strengths and they all have weaknesses. The second explanation is the sociological explanation. And essentially, these folks say religion exists to help provide social cohesion and keep societies organized and functioning. It's necessary to organize groups of people. So, for example, like the Ten Commandments in Christianity, thou shalt not kill, or da da da. So the idea is it instills good moral values in people, which is good for the group, the society as a whole. So there's lots of examples of religions doing that. There's also the complete opposite, the critique of the sociological explanation. For example, the Crusades, in which people in the name of Christianity went to war and killed, thousands and tens and hundreds of thousands of people. So in what way is that beneficial for the society, right? So critique of the social explanation. And then the third explanation Peoples and Bailey touch on, they call it the cognitive or intellectual. And I also refer to it as the evolutionary explanation. And the idea behind this one, it's an interesting one, that religion is sort of, it's related to this idea of being adaptive for us. It's kind of built into us as a species. So sort of bear with me. I'm not going to ask you details about this, but it's really interesting. This guy, Scott Atran, writes about this in Gods We Trust. And he writes about these things, the sort of beginning of his argument is these things called evolutionary landscapes in the minds of people. What that means is kind of like when we talked about structuralism. People across the world, regardless of culture, all have basic mental capacities, like recognizing binary opposites, up, down, left, right, dark, light. Everyone, we might define it different, we might recognize different things, but everyone around the world recognizes binary opposites. It's one of those mental capabilities that's just built into the way our brain works. And there's other mental landscapes that predispose us to certain ways of thinking. I won't get into them. So he talks about these mental landscapes. And then on top of that, we are also evolved something called fight or flight, right? So if there's a threat, we either fight, defend ourselves, or run and try. It increases our survival, right? So building on this, Atran says then, suppose a horticulturalist in South America is out hunting and they hear a rustle in the bushes. Now, fight or flight would say that could be a jaguar or an animal waiting to jump out and attack them, right? So that sort of visceral reaction that you can feel it in your chest, that little bump of anxiety or, oh, I got to do something, right? That's adaptive for us. It saves our life often when we are under threat. So another thing going on in the human mental landscape is also people reasoning that there's things, this is sort of the cognitive side, things that they don't understand, right? Like lightning and maybe shooting stars or volcanic eruptions or really nasty illnesses or diseases. Things that can't really be explained at this time, right? At least pre-Western science. And so people would reason, well, there must be some sort of supernatural explanation for this because they can't tangibly identify what's causing these things. And this is where religion, beliefs and practices in the supernatural come along. So that when you hear a random thunderclap or noise, that could be spiritual forces, the gods or spirits or whatever it is. Because people sort of believe that the supernatural gives a shit about worldly affairs. And so the idea is, and I usually like to do this in class, on a table, and usually people kind of jump and get scared. That's that fight or flight reaction, right, to save your life. And so Scott Atran reasons that from this, from the tiger or the jaguar jumping out of the bushes, that fight or flight, and also combined with the idea of people reasoning that supernatural beings exist and punish or help people, then better to sort of attribute those loud noises or potentially dangerous things you see the unexplainable things, better to attribute that to a powerful being, a supernatural power, and behave correctly so that you don't get punished. Better to do that, whether it's true or not, because if you believe and it's true, things will go well for you. If you believe and it's not true, no real harm done. If you don't believe in the supernatural and it's real, you're screwed. And so Stuart Guthrie, famous anthropologist, said, then religion is a good bet, right? Sort of adaptive, if you will. That's sort of the intellectual, cognitive, evolutionary explanation, really overgeneralized. Interesting stuff. So these are some of the explanations trying to get at why do we see religion across all societies? What is it? What does it do for people? So religion, what is religion? In any society, it's a powerful, organized definition of how things are in the world and also how they should be. It's defined as a belief in some entity or entities who exist alongside but outside this material world, outside the natural world. For example, the God in Christianity, ancient Greek gods in Greek polytheism. Also something we'll talk about it a bit among small-scale societies, animism. Nature being animated by all sorts of spiritual energy. So these are all examples of supernatural entities. Also, it could be not an entity, it could be a supernatural sort of substance that brings its possessor power. Many of you maybe have heard of something called mana, either in film or video games, but it's in different cultures, it's believed to be a really powerful spiritual force. And so, for example, in headhunting, oh, sorry, let me back up. So in the Solomon Islands, let me just back up. So spiritual or supernatural powers, gods, and also something called mana. The culture, different words for mana, so I'm just going to use the term mana. It depends on the culture we're talking about, what they would call it. So in Solomon Islands, they used to practice something called headhunting, which literally means different villages would go around and go to war with other villages and take the heads of their captives. The reason for this was to increase one's supernatural power and ability, the person and also the village. The idea is that again, we're oversimplifying, it goes into their beliefs. And the idea is that the most powerful life force resides in certain places of the body over others. For example, if you get your finger chopped off, you're probably going to live. If you get your head chopped off, that's probably it. And so they said this mana, the most powerful, the energy, the substance is concentrated in places like the head, maybe the heart, those parts of the body that are most important to our survival. And so the only way, you can only have a finite amount of mana, the only way to increase one's spiritual energy is to capture that of others. Thus, headhunting came about. And in Solomon Islands, headhunting was rampant. So actually, the island of Gizo that I've been talking about this semester, where Titiana and Palange are, it's a small island and it's a really low elevation. And that island was actually not populated until colonialism because of headhunting. Too small and too low of elevation for villages to set up there and be able to protect from marauding headhunters. And so Gizo was actually never colonized by Solomon Islanders. This is exactly why the British, when they colonized Solomon Islands, set up on Gizo, because it was already empty because of headhunting. Of course, with colonialism and missionization, headhunting was eradicated. But one example of this idea of spiritual power or forces, not necessarily in the form of a god or a being. You should have also read about today, and this will not be on the quiz for this week, but it will be on your exam 2, something called Noom among the Kung. And that's also a spiritual substance. And interestingly, Noom among the Kung, anyone can attain it, females or males. It's not reserved for a specialized or privileged few. And so that sort of also reflects the egalitarian nature of the Kung, right? Anyone can attain Noom or become a healer or a shaman. It's not just for certain people. Other characteristics of religion is they typically have myths or worldviews. These are stories that recount the deeds and purposes of supernatural powers. They explain how things came to be. They usually contain worldviews or explanations about how the world works, things like good versus evil, or spiritual energy, or karma, or creationism. And note that myth, it doesn't mean false. We typically think of those as synonymous. A myth is not a true story. It's really easy to see the myths of other groups as false, but our own is true. For example, the story of how Thanksgiving began is a total myth. It began during the Civil War less than 200 years ago, but that's not what we teach everyone in our culture. Another important characteristic is religion's beliefs, practices, and the supernatural all have rituals and symbols. People everywhere believe that supernatural powers or spirits actually care about worldly affairs, and therefore you can actually ask or influence them, try to get them to help you or aid you or shape the outcome or reality of your life. And you do this through rituals and symbols. Symbols, things like the cross or a voodoo doll. And rituals in and of themselves are symbolic actions. Think about it. Rituals they're organized, stereotyped, symbolic behaviors intended to influence supernatural powers, or at least related to the supernatural powers. So it's organized and stereotyped, meaning the action is patterned. It's done the exact same way every time. The same words are uttered, the same movements and actions are performed, same clothing, sometimes even same time of the year or week or day. For example, Christian prayer or church on Sundays. Also, one of the rituals in Catholicism or Christianity, eating the body and blood of Christ symbolically through eating a cracker and wine, although I hear there's no alcohol in it these days. Other examples, doing multiple daily prayers in Islam, facing a certain direction each time. Healing rituals performed by shamans. These rituals in themselves are symbolic. Again, they're performed the same way every time, and they have to be done the same way. If you don't do it the same way, then you're not doing the ritual, you're not doing the symbolic activity. This is literally the meaning of doing something ritualistically, right? Do it the same way every time, a stereotype patterned. Other examples, singing different songs or hymns or prayers. Again, you sort of say the same thing each time, or bathing in a certain river, like in Hinduism in India. Another example peoples in Bailey give, which is just an interesting one, is among the Hopi, U.S. Southwest Indigenous Native American group. And they have something called kachina dolls. You might have seen these growing up or in different stores. Kachina doll, so they're a little doll, kind of the size of a Barbie or something, obviously looks different than that. And among the Hopi, they believe that kachinas are these supernatural beings that live in the hills surrounding the Hopi villages, and that they come into the village, the kachinas, during the spring and the summer. And during this time, Hopi men will do dances and rituals to honor them and dress up to embody them. And this is all done to ensure that the kachinas are, satisfied and that the rains come. Again, rituals and symbols are intended to influence outcomes. There's also secular rituals, things that aren't ritual but not related to religion. For example, graduation is a ritualized activity in our society. Marriage is ritualized, sometimes religiously in a church, sometimes it's on a beach and has nothing to do with religion, but it's still ritualized. Death is another one that's ritualized cross-culturally. So the central question to keep in mind today is religion useful knowledge? To whom and in what circumstances is it useful? What's its purpose? What does it do for us? Again, it's one of those universals. All societies have it. Why? And so anthropologists make an important distinction among different religions, and it's a difference in scale, in the scale of the organization of the beliefs and practices. So it's not a value judgment, it's just a difference in size and scale. And on the small scale, we have local community-based beliefs and practices, tons of different systems of belief and practice that accompany various cultures around the world. And then on the large scale industrial societies, people tend to experience religion in the form of world religions, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Judaism, Buddhism. And there's only a handful of world religions, unlike the small scale religions. So world religions, religion on the large scale first. A couple of main characteristics that distinguish them from small scale religions. One is all the world religions have a universal moral structure, meaning that there's moral norms and expectations of conduct that apply to people everywhere. They don't just say you members of the religion need to do this, that the religion would say everyone in the world should behave like this. They are also politically transnational, meaning the religion is not bounded by a national or geographic border. You might not know most or almost all of the people that share your religion. This is very different from how religion is experienced on the small scale, where you know almost everyone. Also, the world religions rely on literacy to transmit them. So they have texts, scriptures, things that go hand in hand with learning the religion. Versus in the small scale, it's not written down, it's passed down via oral history. Literacy is really key to the world religions, especially because they're transnational. And for example, religions of the book, Christianity, Islam, Judaism. In Islam, Quran, the main book, literally translates as to read or to recite. And lastly, the world religions have full-time religious specialists, like a priest or an imam, and that is their sole job. That is what they do. This is not true in small-scale religions. So in contrast, on the small scale, small community-based practices, main characteristics is that they are based on personal, face-to-face, spoken communication. Unlike the transnational world religions, you know most everyone in your religious community, and transmission of the religion doesn't rely on literacy or writing it down. It's passed down through oral history, through stories. Also, spiritual beings and forces are immanent in small-scale religions, meaning they exist within things. They are not somehow separate and apart from the natural world, such as God in heaven, but they are imbued and closely linked within the natural world. The rocks, the trees, the animals all have spiritual energy. It's not somehow, again, separate from the natural world. One example of this in Solomon Islands, I'll do a quick story. Solomon Islands, in Titiana, it was my first field season out there, and I was doing interviews sort of late at night. It started to get dark, and I was in a different section of the village called Nikunau. And so I traveled back over to Mayaki, where I stay in Titiana. And that night, I had the weirdest fucking nightmares of my life. Really weird dreams. So the next morning, I was talking about that in Pidgin to the people I was staying with. And I found out, actually, this was a great way to find out cool little things about their culture. So I was just mentioning I had these really weird dreams. And Henrik, the man of the house, oh, Savannah, it might be because you had bad dreams. It might be because some ancestor spirits followed you home last night. You were over in Nikunau, and that's not our ancestors' territory. That's Nikunau. And so it was starting to get dark, and when it gets dark, the ancestors come out to protect their descendants and their land. And so you were over there, it was getting dark, and you probably got followed home by some of the ancestor spirits that were trying to chase you off, and that's why you had really fucked up, in my words, dreams. And so Henrik said too, he said, so Nick, if that happens again and you're out there late at night giving interviews, try and run around a tree real quick so the ancestor spirit gets confused and loses you and can't follow you home. But anyways, right, the spirits, the energy, the supernatural, it's not somehow separate and apart from the natural world. It's imbued within it, closely linked. And on that note, small-scale practices are woven into daily life. Practicing them is not reserved for certain times of the year or the day or the week, or for certain occasions like holidays. The practices are imbued in most aspects of their life. So they're used for practical reasons, things like curing illness or making the crops grow, ensuring the rains come, technical things like this. One term typically used to describe small-scale religion is animism. And animism is defined as nature being animated by all sorts of spirit beings. So sort of what I was just talking about. In contrast to the world religions, these religions do not have full-time religious specialists. They have part-time religious specialists called shamans. And the word shaman comes from a society called the Chukchi in Siberia in the Arctic. And their healer, religious practitioner, was called a shaman. That's when this type of role was sort of identified among the society. And then the word has then been applied to similar types of people in other societies. So shaman is the word we use. And they're often believed to have specialized knowledge and powers that allow them to do various things like communicate with the spirits, understand spiritual messages, conduct healing and other rituals, also remove spells. Some of the ways they do this, they access the spiritual realm through trance or even taking hallucinogens to achieve altered states of consciousness so they can travel into the spirit realm. So I just wanted to give you a real quick example because we won't talk about shamanism a whole lot, but it's really interesting. I used to teach a whole class on this stuff. There's a great article about Inuit culture in the Arctic about the sea goddess called Sedna. And so I won't tell you the whole story, but the sea goddess Sedna is key to Inuit mythology in this region. And she lives at the bottom of the sea, and she ensures that the people do well, that game is plentiful, that they have enough resources to get by. When things aren't going well in the society, let's say hunting isn't going well, which is a problem, the shaman will perform a ritual in which the whole community comes together. The shaman enters a trance, altered state of consciousness, and during that, he travels down to the bottom of the sea through the spirit realm, so he's still physically in the room, travels to the bottom of the sea to ask Sedna why the people are experiencing problems. And Sedna, her body's sort of made of the different marine resources that the Inuit rely on. And she has all these tangles in her hair when the shaman sees her. And the tangles are symbolic of the people's problems, either lies or misdeeds that are causing issues for the group. And so the shaman will untangle Sedna's hair. Sedna will tell the shaman what possible problems might be causing the hunting to not be good. And the shaman will travel back up to the non-spirit realm and share with the society what Sedna told him. And so in this article, in this example, there's this one, people start sort of confessing, right? Oh, well, I know I wasn't really supposed to do this, and I didn't tell anyone because I knew that it would hurt this person, but we're supposed to be honest, and so this is what happened. It's cathartic, right? People can talk about stuff that is causing them stress or anxiety, or that they've been holding in, or that someone else is bothering them, and so it's sort of a safe space to let all this stuff out. So this one girl, for example, she confesses that she had miscarried. And in this culture, if you miscarry, you have to throw out all the stuff in the house, the furs, the blankets, everything, because it's said to be polluted from the miscarriage. And so she didn't tell anyone because she felt terrible. She didn't want her family to have to get rid of all their stuff. And so she sort of confesses to this during the ceremony. And so it's cathartic, possibly therapeutic for the community in this sense. People vent and get stuff out that may have been causing tensions, because even if you don't explicitly tell people what you're doing, or you're trying to hide something, in small groups of people or communities, everyone pretty much knows what everyone else is doing, right? You can't really get away with much, and that creates tension. And so through this shaman ritual and coming back up and people sort of confessing taboos that they violated, it's therapeutic for the community, and it usually results in better social relationships. And with better social relations among the group, hunting coordination just might improve. So that's one example of shaman among the Inuit. The examples take different forms depending on where and who we're talking about. So religion among small-scale societies is useful then. It organizes important life events and even more routine activities. For example, in terms of important life events in many cultures, it's religion that organizes this. Rites of passage are considered these major transitional periods in people's life where you transition from sort of one state to another new state. Birth, from being, a fetus to a human being. Puberty, from sort of being prepubescent to sexually mature. Marriage, death, these are all sort of major transitional events. Funerals tend to be the most important rite of passage. This guy, Van Gennep, talks about rites of passage, and he talks about 3 stages. And the first stage is the rite of separation. So let's just take marriage. The rite of separation might be once your partner asks if you want to marry them. That would be sort of the rite of separation. You're no longer single or whatever, you're now engaged. And then there's a liminal state, sort of this middle transitional state where you're sort of betwixt and between. You're not really what you were, but you're not this new status yet either because you're not married yet. And then there's the rite of incorporation or reincorporation, the third final stage, the marriage. And so they go through the ceremony, the ritual, maybe exchange rings or vows, and the person's now married. They've entered a new status, a new role, and been reincorporated back into the community with that new role. This is rites of passage. They can be organized by religion and often are. They also can be secular. Again, we ritualize marriage in the US, but many of us don't do it in a religious sense. Funerals tend to be the most highly ritualized rites of passage in all cultures. And one reason for this is that, like, for example, in the US, we don't really have a ritual surrounding puberty. Not one that I can think of, right? Maybe you start to menstruate or you start to get facial hair, but it's not really very ritualized. In other societies, they have extremely elaborate rituals for puberty, for deciding when a boy becomes a man. There's an interesting one called crocodile scars if you want to look up a 4-minute quick video on it. And so the reason that, puberty may or may not be important, marriage may or may not be ritualized depending on the society, but in every society, people will eventually die. There's no sort of way out of that one. So we tend to see this highly ritualized cross-culturally. And there's other rituals that are performed for more routine activities, again, healing or to make the crops grow. So most of us experience religion on the large scale. Industrial society tends to experience it through the world religions. For example, and various polls still support this, the majority of Americans believe in God, the Christian God. And so large-scale religions and societies tend to view animism, small-scale religion, not as legitimate religion, but merely as silly superstitions. Animism is typically thought of as superstitious by large-scale religion, as is magic, witchcraft, and sorcery. They're not considered legitimate religion by the world religions. Superstitions, by definition, serve no logical purpose. But these practices, these superstitions, magic, witchcraft, sorcery, these are actually about shaping reality in people's lives. They are practiced to produce desired outcomes. And in large-scale religion, many actions are also about shaping reality. Think about it, for example, in Christianity, praying, right? Oftentimes people do this not because they're not worried about the outcome, but because they're worried about the outcome. Praying, sticking pins in voodoo dolls, not sinning during your life so that you can end up where you want to in the afterlife. In Hinduism, follow sort of the rules of your caste and you'll be reincarnated into a higher caste. Large-scale religion is also absolutely about shaping reality, just like small-scale. So a couple of distinctions. Magic is defined by externalized actions. It's not like a system of understanding per se. You have to actually do stuff to practice magic, like sticking pins in voodoo dolls. In contrast, witchcraft and religion are more internalized systems of belief. They explain how the world works and sort of why things happen. They're invisible, if you will, at least to most people. Importantly, witchcraft and magic are all about trying to get the gods or spirits or whatever power it is to do what you want them or it to do. And this is really important because our lives are filled with a lot of uncertainty, right? We cannot completely control the outcomes of our lives. Car accidents happen, illness, death, our family, our loved ones get sick, break up with us, whatever. We cannot control completely the outcomes of our lives. They're filled with uncertainty regardless of sort of where you are. So quick question for you. Usually we'd be in class and I would force you to participate, but do you consider yourself superstitious? Um, Definitely superstitious, strongly agree. Maybe, yeah, I'm kind of superstitious, agree. Disagree, no, I'm not really. Or strongly disagree, no, I'm definitely fucking not superstitious. Think about it for a minute though. Is anyone, I don't think this might be a little more outdated, but like knocking on wood or knocking on your head after you say something you don't want it to happen, or like not leaving the house without your ring or your necklace or your charm or whatever it is that someone gave you that's important to you. Or has anyone ever played sports, either individual or team sports, or participated in drama? Think about it. Is magic useful? Let's look at an example from baseball. So what I want you to do right now is type this URL into your browser and watch this clip. It's about 3 minutes or less on baseball. And just when you start watching it, you'll understand why I'm showing it to you. It shows baseball magic, right? The batter coming up to the box. Well, just watch it and you'll see, and then come back and start the lecture again, and we'll go from there. Okay, so go ahead, watch the clip on baseball magic. Again, it's about 3 minutes. It should pop right up. Okay, welcome back. Hopefully you watched the clip. I don't show them for no reason, so do it. It's for a reason. Okay, so with that, which aspect of baseball has the least amount of superstition associated with it? Pitching, fielding, or hitting? And the answer is B, fielding. So magic and ritual is used to ensure success in human activities. And people are likely to invoke supernatural forces in situations that they have little control over the outcome, or that are situations that are uncertain. And so George Melch, the author of Baseball Magic that you read for today, and he was a former professional baseball player turned anthropologist. And after the end of one baseball season, he was taking an anthropology class called Magic, Witchcraft, and Religion. And as he listened to his professor describe the magical rituals of the Trobriand Islanders, these exotic so-called primitives, he noticed that what the Trobriand Islanders were doing wasn't really all that different from what he had seen his baseball teammates do at the ballpark for luck. And so Melch explains, U.S. baseball players are more likely to use magic, whether that's ritual, taboo, or fetishes, on those aspects of the game that are unpredictable, like hitting and pitching, rather than fielding, because over fielding players have much greater control. And so he says pitching, regardless of the pitcher's performance, how well the pitcher does that day, the outcome also depends on several other things beyond the pitcher's performance, such as the proficiency of his own teammate to field the ball if it gets hit, how well the other team is playing and batting, and also a little bit of luck. So lots of chance, lack of control involved in that situation, even if the pitcher is playing really well. Hitting is full of uncertainty. Some say it's one of the most difficult sort of positions in sports. Unless it's a home run, the ball might find a gap between the players. It might fall right into the other team's glove. About even some of the best batters are only successful maybe 1 in 4 times that they come up to the plate. Fielding, however, Melch explains, chance doesn't really play much of a role. 9.7 out of 10 times, the fielder knows that he's going to execute the play. For example, the average fielding percentage or success rate is 0.975, about 97%, compared to a 0.245, about 25% success rate for hitters. And so Melch says, magic appears in situations of chance and uncertainty. So when a player does well, He doesn't attribute this to his skills alone because his skills don't really change much from day to day. And so, what then explains the difference on a good day versus a bad day? And the argument goes that players make a correlation. They attribute their success or failure to a food they ate, an object they found, an activity they did that day. And players will then repeat those behaviors in an effort to bring more luck. Let's talk about pigeons for a minute. Last clip for the day. You'll watch it in just a moment. B.F. Skinner was a famous psychologist and did research on pigeons. What Skinner learned is that pigeons learn to associate food or getting food, a reward, with whatever the pigeon was doing when they got the reward. So if it was tucking its head and got food, it would then assume if I tuck my head, I'll get more food. And Skinner found the birds will associate the arrival of food with whatever particular action they were doing. Again, tucking their head, walking in a clockwise circle, whatever. Once the pigeon makes the association between the food or the reward and the action they were doing when they got it, only sporadic reinforcement is needed to reinforce that correlation. So what I want you to do now, pause the lecture, type this URL into your browser, and watch this clip of Skinner actually doing this with pigeons. It's cool. It's like a minute and a half tops. Watch it and then come back to the lecture. Okay, so kind of cool stuff. There was one example that Melch talks about. Again, only sporadic rewards are needed to reinforce that association that pigeons make. One pigeon associated hopping side to side with getting food pellets, and this poor pigeon hopped 10,000 times side to side before finally giving up because they want to see how long it would do it before giving up. So the point is many or all of us, we learn to associate things, make correlations with other things or actions or behaviors. Even pigeons do this. And we're often not really conscious of it or what we're doing. We can't always consciously explain it, right? We just know that we do it and it kind of has to be that way. And so hopefully you read George Melch's Baseball Magic. Let's talk about it. What are baseball players' magics? He defines sort of three categories, including rituals, taboos, and fetishes. So first, rituals. What are rituals? Again, they're these patterned symbolic activities, usually performed to bring about a desired outcome. So eating chicken or taking the same route to the stadium on game day, eating black licorice while pitching, shaving your arm, eating certain types of foods. Melch gives a bunch of different examples. Maybe you have some of your own favorites. Let me see if I have my favorites. One guy, Mike Hargrove, and you should have seen him in the clip from Baseball Magic just now. His rituals took so long when he went up to go bat. He was actually nicknamed the human rain delay. Ex-Mets pitcher Turk Windows, he used to chew black licorice while pitching, only to spit it out, brush his teeth, and reload the candy between innings. And he wore a necklace of animal teeth from animals he killed. Okay. Other rituals. One guy was headed out to the field and found a scrap of paper, like basically a piece of trash, and picked it up and then had a really good game. And he's been picking up trash before the game ever since. Doesn't have to be the same, just pick up a piece of paper. It's a ritual, right? Done the same way every time. Wade Boggs used to eat chicken before every game. Had chicken one day, got 3 hits, did really well. Continued to eat chicken for every game, before every game for like 17 years. His wife had over 40 chicken recipes. Okay, so rituals. Lots of different examples that Melch gives. I'll give you a couple. I have rituals that I have practiced. I'll give you an ethnographic example and one of my own. And then hopefully, I would like to hear what some of your rituals, magics, fetishes, taboos might be. Again, we don't refer to it as magic, right? But what we do is really not all that different from the baseball players or the Trobriand Islanders in many cases. The next sort of, oh yeah, real quick, other examples of rituals. So on the bottom of the slide on the right, that's a sea tornado, a water spout off the coast of Titiana. And we saw that one day, and Henrik, who I was staying with, he told me the story. He had a big machete out, and he said, Los Solomons, right, they have this mythology, if you will, or whatever, belief. and you take the machete and you swipe it sort of back and forth horizontally across the sky towards the water spout. And it's supposed to sort of break it up, keep it from coming onto the land. So we never got hit by it. So that's one example of sort of a ritual to produce desired outcomes over things we can't really control. Another example, one of my own, I used to play soccer, and so this was a team ritual we would do, and I'm telling you my stupid example, so hopefully you'll share yours with me. We used to do this cheers, and then we'd get in the locker room, or if it was an away game, wherever we could, we'd get in a big huddle, put our arms around each other, and then if anyone's ever heard of the Dropkick Murphys song Olé, and sing this song, Olé, 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 getting louder and louder and whatever, and then probably cheer and clap at the end. And that was our pre-game ritual. Had to be done same way, same song, every time before the game. Had to be done. So that's one example. I hope you guys also, there's going to be an opportunity here in a minute for you to share some of your own examples and earn a couple extra credit points in doing so. The next category that Melch talks about is taboos. And note that different examples can sort of fit under more than one of these categories. So taboos are opposite of rituals. These are the things that you're not supposed to do. They usually grow out of exceptionally poor performances. So a player does really bad and then attributes that poor performance to something that he did that day and then avoids doing that in the future. The word taboo comes from the Polynesian word taboo, which literally means prohibition, things you should not do. Don't step on chalk lines, or old taboos used to be don't shave before the game, or don't have sex before the game. It was believed to drain your energy. Science today would say actually it probably provides a benefit. And so some taboos are a result of individual experience. Melch talks about one of his taboos was he ate pancakes before a game, had a real shit game, did the same thing a few weeks later, ate pancakes, played real bad, and he never ate pancakes before the game again. Another player used to eat a meatball sandwich before the game. Understandably so, he did not play well after he ate a big meatball sandwich and swore those off for the rest of his career. Some of them are part of the culture of baseball. So one example Melch talks about is this one taboo: you don't mention a no-hitter while one is in progress. It is taboo to do so. Don't violate that. Don't do that, right? It's said it'll throw you off. Then you guys won't end up getting a no-hitter. So what type of taboos do maybe some of you all have? Things you avoid or don't do in order to bring luck or confidence or reduce anxiety in regards to a situation. Maybe you have a game coming up, or you're taking a test or a performance. I don't know. Think about it a little bit. And then the third category Melch talks about are fetishes. So fetishes are they're objects. In general, they could also not be objects. You'll see what I mean. So fetishes, charms or material objects that are believed to embody supernatural power that can aid or protect the owner, the carrier. It might be a new object, might be a gift or a special thing that someone gave you, someone that's important to you. It could be a chain, a coin, a hat, a cross, a piece of trash you found while you were headed out to the ballpark. In this case, that picking up the piece of trash would be the ritual, the trash itself, the fetish. Someone else's shoes, certain uniform numbers. These are all examples of fetishes. Putting clothing on a certain way, wearing certain clothing. There was one guy that did really well wearing a turtleneck on a chilly night, and so he kept wearing a turtleneck right up into the summer when it was 85 degrees. Really uncomfortable, but hey, that was his ritual. Got to keep doing it as long as things are going good. Some people don't wash their underwear. Gross. One example, which is outdated now, I think it was Ty Cobb, I'm not sure, he used to carry around a little black boy with him and rub his head for luck. So lots of different examples of fetishes, and maybe sometimes examples from students I get is like you have a ring or a jewelry or a specific object, maybe came from family or a friend, and you just don't feel right leaving the house without it. Like you never take it off, or if you take it off in the shower but then realize you forgot it, you go back to the house to get it. These are fetishes. And so the meaning of fetish is The object's just an object. A ring is just a ring. A piece of paper is just a piece of paper or trash. A foot is just a foot. When you fetishize something, you're attributing special power to that object beyond the object. So like that ring or piece of jewelry that you have to wear, that you have to have, or you don't feel right without, that's fetishized, right? It's important beyond the actual material object. The example I always use, because I can't think of a better one, is like a foot fetish. So some people have foot fetishes. It turns them on, they get all into it. A foot is just a fucking foot, but some people attach meaning beyond it, right? Fetish. And so what are your fetishes or charms or objects that you use to bring luck or ensure outcomes? Think about that. One other thing Melch talks about is education and superstition. And so someone in the 1890s predicted that as baseball players became more educated, that we would see less of these rituals, these superstitions or routines, if you will. And so Melch tested this. A lot of the players, when he was playing in the 90s, had some college. Oh, excuse me. Well, he was playing in the 60s. So he saw his players performing magic all around him. Well, in the 90s, when he was writing this article, he went and interviewed players again. And many of them by the 90s had some college education. And so when he asked them about their rituals, players were somewhat hesitant to admit they had superstitions because, again, superstitions have a negative connotation. They serve no purpose. But when Melch asked about their routines, he described the players described rituals and fetishes and taboos that weren't really any different from what his teammates were up to in the 60s. Oh, just one other example of a fetish, because I like this example. Uniform numbers. One guy's number was 7, and he switched teams, and 7 was taken, so he took the number 16 because 1 plus 6 equals 7. He switched teams again. I think 16 was taken, 7 was retired, and so he became 25 because 2 plus 5 equals 7. There's another example of a fetish where a player had to borrow his teammate's shoes on the road, had an outstanding game, and then he ended up buying those shoes from that teammate. One other example, a new player joined a team and wanted his number, his fetish, on his uniform, and paid, I think it was like $25,000 to the player that had his number to trade him. So you have an opportunity if you want. You are not required to do this, but as with most things in life, the more you put into it, the more you'll get out of it. And so I'm going to open up a thread on the discussion board. It'll be open by the time you see this. And I'd like to have a conversation about magic. The question is, what magic rituals or routines have you practiced either in the past or contemporarily? Especially those of you that have played sports or maybe been involved in drama. Again, we don't call them rituals or magic, but is it really any different than the stuff we just talked about? And so jump on the discussion board if you're up to it. It's not required, but I'm offering extra credit if you do it. And give us an example. Share an example with us of your magic, your rituals, either past or present. If you really have nothing to talk about, which is probably not going to be true for most of you, contact me or you can find another way to contribute. But give us your examples. So answer the question. Give us an example. A couple sentences max should do. It doesn't have to be that long. And then I also, after you do this, I encourage you to engage with the examples that other people have provided, kind of like if we are in class having a class discussion. And note, you don't have to engage with other people's posts, but I encourage you to contribute if it's appropriate and relevant. So if you're adding to the point or making a similar point or asking a question, feel free to engage with each other like a discussion. I'll also jump in and moderate. And again, to encourage participation, I'm going to add up to 2 points of extra credit to your overall score for the course. This doesn't sound like a lot, but 2 points, that's for your final score. That's half a percentage point of your final score. So it could be the difference between a B and an A C and a B, etc. So spend a few minutes, or maybe you already have an example, thinking about this, and then share it with us on the discussion board. Please, no random posts just to try to earn points. Serious contributions only. They don't have to be amazing, but just, don't just like write a nonsense sentence just to show up on the discussion board to try to get points. And just be respectful. I don't think this will be a problem for our class, but be respectful to everyone else in the class. Keep it professional and courteous. Don't make it personal. So yeah, either now, if you have something in mind, jump on the discussion board, or I'll also remind you at the end of this talk about that opportunity. But I really encourage you to do so. It gets really interesting, and I'm sorry we're not in class to actually talk about this. So Melch's argument about baseball magic draws upon the arguments of a famous British anthropologist, Bronislaw Malinowski, that was working earlier in the 1900s. And he did work among a group, the Trobriand Islanders, which are pictured on the map. They're just northeast of Papua New Guinea and sort of west of Solomon Islands. They're horticulturalists, gardeners, and also fishing people, and they're Melanesian, just like the majority of Solomon Islands. And what Malinowski's hypothesis was all about is when, where, and why magic is used. He sort of made the argument that people don't do these seemingly irrational behaviors are not irrational. There's reasons why people do these things. And so he sought to understand that, where, why, and when is magic used. And so he noted that the Trobriand Islanders use magic for fishing, but only in certain settings, not everywhere that they fish. There's two main settings that they fish in, the inner lagoon and the open sea. And so in the inner lagoon, it's usually protected by a reef break. All the large waves are outside of the lagoon. There's no large predators inside the lagoon. It's usually calm. And so if you fish in here, you know you're coming home with dinner. It's reliable. There's lots of resources in the lagoon, and it's not real dangerous. You're gonna come home. It's not real dangerous. So it's reliable and safe. And the Trobrianders really don't practice magic when they go fishing in the inner lagoon. It is when they go out to the open sea that their fishing is accompanied by extensive magical rituals. When you head out into the open sea past the reef break, it gets a lot more dangerous. First, you may or may not come back with fish with dinner. The yields can vary widely depending on the weather and where the different fish populations are moving around. So you may do real well, you may come back empty-handed. And fishing in the open sea is way more dangerous and risky than fishing in the inner lagoon. Just for example, when I was in Solomon Islands, I went out there for 6 weeks and then 2 months. So like less than 4 months, there was 2 different villagers in Titiana, a village of just 350 people, 2 different people that never came back after they went out fishing one morning. That's crazy. We don't usually go to Vaughn's or the grocery store and worry about not coming back alive. I remember the first season I was out there, one lady who lived near Ruta and Henrik, near us, she had lost her husband, not from fishing, but she lost her husband within the first few days I was there. And then the second field season I was out there, her brother had come to live in Titiana to help support her since her husband died. The brother went out fishing on a stormy day and he never came back. I'm not quite sure what happened, but I left about 5 days after that. My trip was over and he still hadn't come back, which means he's probably not coming back. The seas get rough, people drown, there's sharks, people get lost. So it's really, really dangerous. The uncertainty and danger surrounding open sea fishing results in the fact that among Trobrianders, this type of fishing is accompanied by extensive rituals and magic designed to assure safety and success. There's one instance, just as an interesting side note, in which they'll use magic in the inner lagoon, but it's not because of danger. It's when they need to ensure they have a really, really large catch because they're going to be using it in some sort of exchange ceremony. Right? Remember how important exchange is in Melanesian society. Big man status, sort of giving more than people can give back. You gain a sense of loyalty. So only this instance in the inner lagoon, they'll use magic also when they need to make sure that they're really, really successful because it's going to affect their status in the broader society. So the question is magic real? Does it work? And normally we would talk about this in class. Feel free to add to the discussion board on this as well. And so this is a hard question to answer because in our culture, when I say magic, we think of movies and Hollywood and Ouija boards and like witches and stuff. And so our initial impression is no, magic is make-believe, at least in the exotified way we typically think of magic. But when you look at it from an anthropological point of view, the why and even the how of what, say, the Trobriand Islanders are doing when they practice magic, it's really not so different from what US baseball players or many of us even do. But we don't call it magic. We don't perceive it as that. We don't label it as that. Maybe we call it routine or superstition, or it's just what I do and I don't really have a word for it. And so the answer is sort of no and yes and yes. In this exotic way, Americans often think of it, that's not really what we're talking about. And so obviously the rituals and superstitions of baseball do not make the pitch travel faster or a hit ball find gaps, nor do the Trobriand Islander rituals calm seas or bring fish. What both do, however, is give their practitioners a sense of control over the situation and with that added confidence. And this is important if you really believe eating chicken or taking a certain route to the game or not changing your underwear or uniform number will make you a better hitter or pitcher. It probably will, right? That added confidence of the practitioner, that reduced anxiety, can have a tangible effect on performance. So in this sense, we could say, yeah, magic does work. I'll sort of leave that open for you to think about. Okay, so that's a bit about magic. Let's switch gears and talk for a few minutes about witchcraft. E. Evans Pritchard, famous British anthropologist, wrote about witchcraft among the Azandi, his famous book, Witchcraft, Oracles, and Magic Among the Azandi. And in it, he explains how to understand their system of witchcraft. So a little bit of background. E. Evans Pritchard was trying to understand, he wanted to produce an understanding of what many Westerners were calling irrational behaviors and ideas. Pritchard wanted to know, what do these things do for people? What do social institutions like religion, like witchcraft, do for people? At the time, most thought societies like the Azandi were primitives, right? Which is an ethnocentric, inappropriate word. Because of their beliefs in things that seemed irrational, like witchcraft. What Pritchard said is that people don't behave and think differently because they're somehow lesser or less intelligent. They aren't smart enough or rational enough. Not at all. Their notions and beliefs in witchcraft are not irrational or ridiculous. In fact, their notions are quite logical and rational, just like ours. The point of departure from us is in their underlying assumptions. What they would explain as witchcraft, we would explain with a different term. And so the opening of this book opens with this. It's 1937, and an Azandi granary collapses on top of a man, killing him. How do the Azandi explain this? And they explain it in terms of witchcraft. In fact, the Azandi explain nearly all misfortune in terms of witchcraft. People live together in these communities, and they might get jealous of one another. They might be feuding. They might have wronged one another. And this might cause them to wish the other person ill will, maybe cause misfortune through witchcraft. The Azandi are not stupid. They are not ignorant of cause and effect. Sometimes granaries collapse, and there's nothing remarkable about that, right? Everyone knows in Zandi land that termites eat the wood, and even the hardest woods decay over time. Granaries are heavy structures made of large wooden beams and clay. And so all granaries over time, eventually via termites and rotting wood, are going to collapse. They are not stupid. They understand cause and effect. They understand how the granary collapses. Termites, rotting wood. So the granary for the Azandi is sort of a summer house during the summer, or really during the year. When it's hot during the day, people will sit beneath it to get out of the sun. They'll chat or maybe play African hole and stick game or work at some sort of craft. And sometimes it might happen that there are people sitting under the granary when it collapses, and the people are injured or even killed sometimes. And again, it's a heavy structure made of wood and beams and clay. When this happens, when the granary collapses on top of a man, a woman, a person, the man blames witchcraft. The Azandi do not attribute the collapse in general to witchcraft. Again, they're not stupid. They understand cause and effect. Termites and rotting wood are how the granary falls. They get that cause and effect. It is not the collapse in general that they attribute to witchcraft. It is the collapse of this particular granary at this particular time with this particular person sitting underneath it that is caused by witchcraft, right? Sometimes granaries fall and no one's sitting underneath them. And sometimes people sit under them and they don't fall. Again, they understand the how, termites, rotting wood, the why the granary fell on that specific person at that specific time, right at that moment. Why? Witchcraft. Azandi would say witchcraft. Here, we would often describe this as coincidence or bad luck or misfortune. And the Azani again would call it witchcraft. And interestingly, is this really so different? The why explained by witchcraft. Is this really so different than what some people do in large scale religions? So just like the Azandi know termites caused the granary to collapse, but they attribute the timing of the collapse on the particular person at that time to witchcraft. In a parallel, a lot of Christians know that cancer is caused by carcinogens that cause uncontrolled cell growth and can lead to death. But the timing of the death of that particular person at that particular time, a lot of Christians will attribute this to God's divine will. They have a plan for that person. They need them up in heaven. It was that person's purpose, right? Not ignorant of cause and effect, understand carcinogens, understand termites. They understand the how. It's the why that witchcraft explains. It's the why that Christianity might explain. People like to blame. Accident, bad luck, misfortune is not satisfying. It doesn't provide an explanation. It's completely out of our control. We can just get fucked for no reason. And so that's not satisfying. People like to blame. God's will, witchcraft. It provides an explanation. And so I said in the beginning, Azandi beliefs aren't irrational. They're quite rational, just like ours. The point of departure in Azandi's explanations and our own is in the underlying cause. For us, we say accident or God's will or karma or poetic justice. For the Azandi, witchcraft. And this idea of multiple causalities, again, that gets at the how, and the why. How, termites, but why, witchcraft. And so I gave this talk. Well, I've been giving this talk for a long time, but a few years ago, I was giving this talk and I came home that day to my apartment. And at that time, I had a big water leak going on. And so I sort of realized that it's not just the Azandi. We also tend to place blame in our own misfortune. Random chance or coincidence is not satisfying. It leaves us with little control over the situation. Witchcraft, religion, it gives you someone to blame, a reason, an explanation. Think about even in our culture, like with car accidents and compensation culture. Even when accidents happen, usually one party is more to blame than the other, right? Even though it's literally defined as a fucking accident. Sometimes someone is to blame. Okay, so I found out, after I gave this talk, I came home and I found out, holy shit, I also live next to a witch. And so what happened is there had been a water leak in my apartment. And this isn't the first time it had happened. There'd been 3 or 4. One time I came home from out of town and there was water spraying out the middle of my wall. And so I immediately notified the landlord and also all the other tenants. There's only like 7 units in the complex. Most of them were owners, but not me at the time. And so I immediately told everyone. It was a really small leak. It was actually outside on the porch. No big problem. Immediately notified everyone. And no one did anything for like 3 weeks to a month because the water leak wasn't in their place. And essentially, many of them were very cheap. They didn't want to actually pay for the repairs. And so they just kept delaying it and doing nothing. Well, the leak that whole time, while everyone was doing nothing because it wasn't affecting them, but it was affecting me, the leak kept getting worse and worse, and I let them know, and the water outside was getting in a bigger puddle. Well, I gave this talk, and I came home, and I stepped into my apartment, and there was water literally coming up through the floorboards. Even though there was plumbers in there, I don't know what the fuck they were doing. And I was super pissed off because there was water covering the entire floor of my house. And this is when I realized, oh my God, I believe in witchcraft too. I live next to a witch. And her name is, this is what she looks like. a little bit. And I call her Blinda because her name's Linda, and I add the B. You can figure out where that comes from. So Blinda, I was really bummed out. There's all this water all over the place, but I found myself not thinking about, oh my God, the old pipes. I wasn't mad at the old pipes. I wasn't mad at how the leak had happened. I was mad at why. I was mad at Blinda, the witch next door, that because she had been the main protagonist delaying the repairs. She was super cheap. She didn't want to pay for shit. And so we just couldn't get anything fixed. So how the leak occurred, how it occurred, old pipes. I know that. I knew it was going to happen. But the timing of the leak, the massive culmination of it, the magnitude of the problem and inconvenience, witchcraft, Blinda. Right? We like to blame too. Random chance, bad luck, coincidence is not satisfying. Humans like to explain. Other characteristics of witchcraft. So the idea behind this way of understanding the world is bad intentions of other people play a role in causing mishaps. So individuals might be feuding or jealous with one another, wish to cause the other person harm, and therefore witchcraft is a way to do that. The majority of human societies believe in witchcraft, or did, as the main cause of human suffering. Again, the effects of random change or accident is less appealing because there's nothing we can do as a result of those beliefs. Witches can be fought and detected, right? Accidents, not so much. And until recently, beliefs in witchcraft were really widespread. For example, up until the 18th century in Europe, this was a widespread belief. It was pervasive. But there has been a recent decline, especially in the last couple hundred years. Why? Why the recent decline in witchcraft? One answer is increasing control over the natural world. We can now understand natural phenomena like volcanoes or weather or thunder that previously didn't really have an explanation. Science, Western science, climatology now provides an explanation for these things. And so this increasing control and understanding over the natural world caused a decline in risks. We understand why these things are happening rather than attributing it to supernatural forces, punishment, and whatever. Western science, right, gave us a new way to understand the natural world in terms of observable, testable phenomenon in ways that we just couldn't before. And we can now deal with and explain things like disease and infection and volcanoes. Importantly, Western science provides explanations to a lot of things that previously couldn't be explained or were explained in terms of the supernatural. But keep in mind, science tends to answer how questions, how the granary collapsed, how the leak got so bad, not why the granary collapsed at that particular time on that particular person right at that moment. So the big question becomes, is there any way of objectively knowing or judging what's actually true or if magic works? Because there's all these different beliefs and practices cross-culturally that are so different from one another, held important to the society but not even known about in other societies. Is there any way to know what we know is true? And it gets to the biggest philosophical problem of all time, which is how do we know if what we know is actually true? Recall epistemology that we discussed in the beginning of class. Epistemology is the study of how knowledge is generated. All knowledge is generated from a certain context. And so if all knowledge is generated from a particular context and inherently must come from a specific perspective, how can you ever objectively know if what you know is really real or really true? Especially because so many things are relative rather than absolute, culturally specific rather than universal. Culture defines for us what's true. Remember the matrix? The culture you live in structures your reality, your knowledge, the world that you understand around you. Culture structures that for you. It shapes how you see it and perceive it, even if we're not aware of the way in which culture is doing that to us. Religion, as part of culture, does this overtly. It tells you what's true. It tells you the way the world is, and it's absolute. But one of the problems is different religions have different truths or different realities. And again, because of cultural relativity, anthropologists don't see one religion as right or wrong or truth or false or better or worse, superior, inferior. They're all just different for different reasons. And so the epistemological challenge for anthropologists then is all truth relative. Is there any objective truths that are transcultural, that are universal, that are true sort of everywhere, like gravity or evolution or supernatural? Western civilization has made a really important distinction between science and beliefs and practices, religion in the supernatural. Science is a generalized explanation. It's culturally neutral, meaning that Western science doesn't belong or isn't used by just certain types of societies. It's embodied by many different types of societies across the world. It's atheistic, meaning it's not based off faith or religion or supernatural, and it's based off rationality, right? The scientific method, this idea that we can observe and test natural phenomena, develop results, replicate the experiment to show the results are due to the actual phenomenon, not the experimenter or not bias on part of the person, and actually understand how the natural world works. You can test it, you can show it, you can improve on it. And this is in contrast to religion. These numerous, multiple culturally specific belief systems, religions, magics, or superstitions that are used to explain and understand the world around us. And so religion fulfills the function to explain bafflement, to help explain suffering and other things that people just can't explain or understand. Science, on the other hand, explains observable, testable things. Sort of the ultimate superstition, according to Western civilization, is Haitian voodoo. And voodoo, just as a side note, these beliefs and practices in voodoo, they're syncretic, meaning it draws upon traditional religions, largely from West Africa, and also world religions, Christianity and Catholicism. And so scientists, Muslims, Christians all think that voodoo is bunk, it's bullshit, or even worse, they think it's evil. What do the Haitians say? What is voodoo actually all about? What's the Enoch understanding? And if you ask the Haitians, most of voodoo, 95% of what they're doing is simply invoking spirits to help people live their lives. That's really not so different than any other religion. Why are the negative aspects so emphasized? Since we can't talk about it as a class, my answer is because it's exotified in film and literature. It's unfamiliar. It seems irrational. It's what other people do. Science, just like religion, is a system of ideas with a history, with a context for its formation. So is it any different than magic or voodoo? And the answer is yes, at least we hope so. Science is a systematic attempt to find naturalistic explanations for objectively observable phenomena. Religion is fundamentally different in the sense that it assumes a realm which is by definition outside of the natural world. It inherently requires belief in something that can't be tangibly identified or seen. In contrast to science, it can be tested, proved, the scientific method. People can come by and do what you said and get the exact same results, right? So you know it's not just what someone's saying, but rather this thing actually exists in nature. In contrast, religions require faith, belief in something that can't really be proven. If I ask you if it's raining outside, what do you say? Most people say, yeah, or yeah, it's raining. They don't say, I believe in it raining outside, right? The word belief in its very nature implies faith rather than absolute knowledge. And so science and religion are two fundamentally different ways for trying to understand the world. Again, one is to explain naturally observable phenomenon. Religion, on the other hand, requires faith, belief in something outside the natural world. And so anthropologists study science just like any other system of beliefs. Science is a European invention of the last 300 to 400 years. It's this quest for reliable, objective truth. Yet many scientific truths have actually turned out to be completely wrong. Think about the Earth being flat. Although There's a total reemergence of this belief right now. I kid you not. And there's an excellent documentary on Netflix called Behind the Curve that looks at the reemergence of flat earthers and the psychology that goes into these types of clearly incorrect beliefs. Okay, so the Earth is flat. The sun revolves around the Earth. Theories on how species changed over time. The biological basis of race doesn't exist. So many scientific truths have turned out to be total bullshit. And so I'll leave you with this. In the same way that we ask the question of whether all truth is relative when discussing religion from a cross-cultural comparative perspective, it's instructive to recognize the world we live in, even when we understand it through Western science, is just one model of reality. This is one of the central contributions of anthropology. The world we live in does not exist in some absolute sense. There are different models of reality depending on where you are, what group you're part of. I'll give you a couple of examples to elaborate on what I mean. Imagine what you see and smell standing in a field. Now imagine what a dog smells in that same field. A bear, a bee, a bird. You can't smell the deer dung 500 yards away, and you can't see an infrared. Other animals maybe can. The point is each animal has different vision and smell and other capabilities, and that shapes that animal's perception. It literally shapes their reality. Last example. The example of matter at the subatomic level is a good illustration of how perception shapes reality differently. What looks like solid matter, touch your computer or your desk. Solid matter is not real. This is not real. Solid energy, solid matter is actually just energy condensed at the subatomic well. This is not real, at least not in the way you perceive of it. Reality is merely an illusion, albeit a very persistent one. And that is exactly what Einstein meant when he said that. Reality is an illusion. Right? Computer, the table, it's not real. It's not solid. Does not exist in the way you perceive of it as a solid object. It is merely energy condensed at the subatomic level. Einstein lived in a time of atomic discovery. When you view an atom, you realize that atoms are not touching each other. They are held together by forces unknown. If you look even closer into the nucleus of the atom, the illusion of solidarity breaks down even more. The smaller particles with more space in between them is what you'll find. The deeper we delve into the atomic world, the more we see that there is no solid. There are only relationships between energies. All matter is merely energy condensed to a slow vibration. And everything you think of as the material world dissolves on the subatomic level. Literally, reality is an illusion, albeit a persistent one. So even objective realities and truths discovered through science are still influenced by perception. I hope you enjoyed this topic. It's one of my favorites. And I really encourage you to jump on the discussion board and get involved in this class conversation about our magic rituals. Let's see what we come up with. Looking forward to see what you guys say. And with that, that's all I have for you today. Take care. Oh, and don't forget to take your quiz by the end of the week.